I never planned my sets.
Really?
So yeah. So the only time I would plan my set is if I'm playing with like a band, and we need to kind of be on point with that. Other than that, it's always a free for all for me. I never really even think about it. So sometimes I'll think about like what I want to start with, or I'll have an idea like, at the very end, I know I want to play like a couple songs at the end that kind of wrap up the night, that kind of thing. But beyond that, it's usually just completely freeform.
You're listening to the Freio Music Podcast.
To the Freio Music
Podcast.
This is Random Rab coming at you from Lyons, Colorado.
Rewinding the tape back to your early childhood, when did you first, what was your first musical memory?
My first musical memory is probably going to church with my parents, and my dad was in the choir, and listening to my mom sing in the pews. At the time, I thought she was this amazing singer, the most beautiful singer. Come to find out later that my mom is not necessarily the best singer, but she gives it her heart. But that was sort of my early memories of growing up around my dad singing, and he's the one that taught me, gave me his guitar, and listening to vinyl records when I was a kid. That was where it all kind of, where I first heard music, and I didn't really entirely hear music until I heard the Chariots of Fire theme song for the first time, and that was like the first song that really changed my life. And then I've been pursuing music really ever since that moment.
Yeah, well, let's dive into that song. What was it that called to you or spoke to you?
Well, this is like a story I've told a couple times, but I had the 45. My dad had the 45 record of Chariots of Fire theme song, and I was pretending to conduct it in the living room with a chopstick, and I just like felt the power of music for the very first time, and actually fell over in the living room and hit the back of my head, and it was like the greatest feeling, and I just kept playing that record over and over again, trying to get that feeling back. And I kind of feel like to this day that's sort of what I'm doing still is looking to recreate that experience.
So that's probably the explanation behind your bio on Spotify, which
yes.
talks about the first note that you ever created, which was the thump of your head.
Yep, that's exactly it.
That's great. That's great. So when did you first begin creating music other than that first thump, that first note? When did you start picking up instruments or exploring the creation process?
I was in band when I was a kid. Like I played trumpet and played in all, jazz band, orchestra, pep band, all that kind of stuff, all through high school and into college some, where I studied music a little bit. But that was all, band stuff. And then I ended up luckily getting into I was eating lunch at my I was in junior high, and this band was playing Pearl Jam, but they didn't have a lead singer, and they're like, "Hey, does anybody know how to sing live?" And I was like, "I could do it," and got up there and sang with them, and then joined the band, and basically in one form or another played with that band for about 5 years under different names. And that was when I first started we did a lot of cover tunes, but then also started composing my own pieces of music at that time. But that was mostly like guitar-based stuff, acoustic guitar, folk music, that kind of thing. And it wasn't until years later that I really started producing, I guess.
I'm trying to separate the creating music versus recording music. So when was that transition that you started recording and producing? Yeah,
well, when I finally bought a 4-track tape recorder, and when I finally got that, that's when I realized that my real instrument was the 4-track, as opposed to the guitar or my voice or anything else. It's like I started to see that thing as an instrument, because it gave me the ability to just fully be in total control and to compose. And so I made, hundreds of tapes of just, using my throat as a kick drum, trying to come up with creative ways to make a snare drum, that kind of thing, and just laying down different tracks. And but obviously there's a lot of limitations there, but it was really good to have that experience to so many years with just a 4-track. So when I finally did get into electronic music production, I had that behind me, and I realized what a blessing it was to be able to escape the tape, Yeah. But then, I started really getting into, I guess, fully creating my own music, and around like 1998 was when I started. A friend gave me a Mac rack mount computer. This is like kind of before there were laptops or anything like that, and it gave me a copy of Logic, and I just dove right in, and that was when it all just really I was like, oh yeah, here we go. This is the power that I've been seeking.
Yeah.
So that's when I started to really take off. And at that time, all I had was, I did this duo project with this guy Trippy Nick, and we were looking for a drummer, couldn't find a drummer, so we bought a drum machine, plugged it into a bass guitar amp, and then played our first show with a drum machine. I'm like, that was really cool. And then started to acquire more synths and samplers. And when that project ended, I was ended up with all this gear I had, and then would end up playing live shows with just hardware for many years. Because at that time, even though I did have a computer at one point, to be able to perform live with it was impossible. So at least for me. So I spent many years when I first started doing the Random Rab thing of just all MIDI and like these, 15-minute songs with like, all the fun gadgets. So, and then eventually once the Ableton came out, and that's when I sort of slowly transitioned into doing it the way I do now.
When did you first get that 4-track recorder? Like roughly what year was that?
That was probably like 95.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, do you see it now in hindsight as maybe, I know it's a hassle to only have 4 tracks and to actually have tape where you're, spending money to record. Do you see it as a stepping stone or helping you kind of with that creative limitation in a way that you mastered the basics?
Yeah, I actually think it's really important if you are producing music now to actually get a 4-track and try to make music on a 4-track. It's kind of incredible what you can do with it. Also, there's a certain tone that you get out of tape that like I got kind of missed sometimes. It's funny, I've kind of gone full circle where now like analog gear is really sought after, and like with vocals, I mean, when you push the tape to its limits, there's a beautiful sound that you get out of it, and I kind of miss that sometimes. But yeah, I think what makes it interesting is that you really have to commit to everything that you do. So, and you don't really, I mean, I used to make loop tapes, but I would play them separately, like little tiny loops and stuff like that to get sort of beds of sound. But for the most part, you have to kind of think about the entire song. So when you lay down the kick drum, you got to go through 4 minutes of kick drum, and then go back with the snare, and then go back with the guitar, and really fully commit, and you bounce everything down, and you get very little chance to you can't undo, you can kind of overdub, but it's not that easy. So I think it's really good practice to understand that, and to not be stuck in the loop, which is, I think, when you're starting music now, it's all loop based. And I think that can actually limit your understanding of learning how to arrange and compose a song right from the get-go.
Yeah. And how long were those tapes, duration wise?
Well, they go at like, I'm trying to remember now, they basically go at double speed, and you only get to use one side of the tape essentially. I mean, you're using all sides of the tape, but you have 2 tracks on one side, 2 tracks on the other. So I think that equates to maybe like 20 minutes or something per tape.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so the strategy that you would use, and I tell me if I'm wrong, but I think you take each instrument on a track, and then kind of, you said bounce, but for those who might not be familiar with the language, but you kind of compress that into one track, and now you've got 3 other open ones.
Exactly. Yep.
And then
But every time you do that, you lose a little quality, right? Mm-hmm. So every time you bounce down, you're kind of sacrificing a little bit. So you can only do it so many times before it starts to sound really hissy.
Yeah.
So you pretty much only get like a couple opportunities, and then you're left with so you have 3 tracks, and then you can bounce 2 to 1, and then you have 2 tracks, and you can bounce, so you're sort of like, you're always compromising to when you add more stuff, which is also a limitation that I think is good to work within, because having only 4 tracks to work with really forces you to think very carefully about what 4 tracks you're going to use, as opposed to now where you have like an infinite amount of tracks and you can just keep adding and adding and adding and adding, and that can be kind of a trap in itself.
Yeah, definitely. And in your mind, was the final track the most sensitive, or the most, you wanted to make sure that you left that last one for the vocals, or what would you leave it for?
Yeah, vocals usually. That was like always the kind of the final thing to work on, because that's the one that you're going to be doing over and over again. And but yeah, every track every song or track or whatever is an exploration of a different way to do it, and there's different ways that to approach. And I still have that philosophy now. It's like I don't have a way that I do things. It's like now it's like, well, I'm going to try this technique, or maybe I'll try and do something completely different this time with how maybe I'll do the vocals first this time or whatever. So it's really about, like I said, every song is just a different technique.
What was like you mentioned that, that moment as a kid where music really impacted you, but were there any other major like turning points or forks in the road that kind of led you to where you are now?
I was doing the heavy metal and the rock thing, and my band, we would play like, frat parties and stuff like that. And I really wanted to be tough and cool. But then I remember playing this show at this university, and there were all these like huge testosterone football player dudes like, yeah. And I remember just being like kind of terrified and thinking like, is this really what I want to do with my life? Like have these guys just like yelling in my face all the time? It's not really who I am. And I once I stopped trying to kind of prove myself as a man and really started to explore what I felt like was my calling, or what I was good at, I guess. And that, to me, like I like beautiful music. I like music that's generally more kind of, I don't know, down tempo or just kind of a melodic. And I think discovering my sound along the way, and of course, traveling and doing these different things, everything kind of gives you a little piece. But I think also discovering psychedelics was a major turning point for me, because like once taking psychedelics for the first time, mushrooms for me was really opened my eyes to like the delicate nature of the power of music and how sensitive our minds are, even though maybe we don't consciously understand what's happening. There's a part of our brain that's interpreting the music for us and gives us a feeling. And kind of discovering that was like a major turning point for me, of trying to, instead of thinking of music as songs, which I think, so what I like to, there's a difference in a definition for me, a song and a track. So a song is something that like Bob Dylan writes, I'll sing it, you'll sing it, that's a song. A track is actually a presentation of a piece of music in this certain form, whether it's on a CD or a vinyl or a Spotify, whatever. That's the track. And getting out of the song mentality, because when you're in a band, you write a song and then you just perform it over and over again. But when you're writing a track, you're actually like, this is the composition that I'm working on that will be heard in this exact form. So that once I made that kind of transition into understanding that now I'm as a producer, I'm going to be making tracks now that are based on songs, then really focusing on trying to perfect every element within the song to be able to present it in a way that is its highest form. And that's where I made the big switch at that time.
So help me understand that track song differentiation.
So if I write a song on a guitar right now, and I'll be like, okay, it goes G, A, B, and that's the chord structure, and here are the lyrics. and then I send you the song like on a piece of sheet music or something, and I'm like, here, or whatever. I'm like, and then you can play the song, and then anybody can play the song, right? It's a song. It's like a thing that's passed on sort of in a traditional way. Tracks are recorded pieces of art. It's like going to an art gallery and seeing the painting on the wall. That's sort of what a track is.
I see.
And not necessarily, you're not going to a gallery to see the artist create it right there in front of you, and that would be sort of the difference. And so like when you're presenting a track to an audience, you're presenting kind of like this piece of art that has been perfected, and that's why it makes like DJing so powerful. It's like you have these things that are like, it's not just the song, it's the actual production of the song in its highest form.
So in a way, it's like crystallized in its integrity.
Yeah, and it's like everything's sort of put together. I mean, you can always make different versions, right? But as far as that particular version goes, it's sort of like exactly how you want it to be. And of course, now we're in such an amazing time with technology. Being able to just like it's like scientifically go in and really hone in on like, okay, this bass, the frequencies and all these different things, like really focusing on a more scientific level and mastering and all this stuff like that. That's like really executing the track, as opposed to like, okay, here's the song, the bass goes like this, the drums go like this, and we play it however we feel. When
you are working on a song, so this is like before it's a track, before it's finalized, where do you start? Are there any general go-tos? Like, is it particular software? Do you pick up a guitar or do you start singing just to get your ideas out into sonic form?
At this point, it's really about, I used to, maybe like start with the beat, right? And then I would get the bass going, and then that, sort of kind of use that as my foundation. Always with the beat, right? But in the last few years, I've really found that can be very limiting, because you're forcing yourself into a genre right off the bat. You're forcing yourself into a certain vibe without even knowing where you want to go with it. So now what I like to do is just mess around with sound until I find something that really stands out to me. It's like, oh, that sounds really cool. That creates a mood. And it could be just a bed of texture. It could be a melody. It could be maybe I'm playing guitar and come up with a chord or something. But I find that it's really effective to find something really beautiful that catches your attention right away and build the song around that. And maybe that thing won't be there in the end, but it gives you kind of a basis to work off of, rather than trying to, I guess, create the structure first and then hope that maybe you'll find something beautiful along the way that can give the song focus. I think when you do start with something that catches your ear right away, then you build around it. It helps sort of, I don't know, keep your focus on what's beautiful, rather than just trying to, I guess, make a song and hope for the best.
You mentioned, I believe, that you transitioned from Logic to Ableton. So are you currently working on Ableton primarily?
Yeah, I work exclusively with Ableton now. Yeah.
And do you have any favorite, this is for the other producers out there, do you have any favorite tools, plugins?
Yeah, I mean,
that are favorite. Maybe let's make it a short list, right? Like 5 or something.
Totally. I just got the new Ableton 11, which is pretty phenomenal. There's a lot, the new comping and some of the probability features are pretty great. But yes, I have a couple plugins that are, there's different so there's creative plugins that give you amazing sounds, and then there's kind of technical assistants that help you kind of hone in the sound. So I have my favorites in both those things.
Let's break
I really
those
like Adaptiverb is a very cool plugin that I use a lot, which is it's a type of reverb that allows you to change the resonant frequencies, like almost like play the reverb as if it were music. Instead of just like a general splash of ambience, you actually can tune it to a certain note or a set of notes. So I can sing a note and then go into Adaptiverb and then turn it into this lush spectrum of sound and be able to kind of use it as a way to float around the music. That's a really powerful one. And then on the other side, I've been like, there's plugins like Soothe, which give you the ability to take the harshness out of things. Because a lot of times with electronic music, everything really stands out if you're not careful, like especially real instruments like violin and guitar. And there's certain sounds you want to use, but when you start EQing them, they can lose something. And so things like Soothe give you the ability to kind of like take the resonant frequencies out of things, and not just on high end, but all through the whole spectrum. So I use Soothe a lot as a way to kind of be able to layer sounds in without being too resonant. But then I also have a lot of hardware. Like I'd say my big Swiss Army knife is the Analog Heat by Electron. That one is probably my favorite piece of hardware. That gives you the ability to just saturate and warm things up and do cool. Like I use it all the time for bass. I mean, that is my go-to for drums. You know, if you have a snare drum and just throw it through the heat, sounds great. I recently just got, I don't know how far we went down the gear hole, but I got this thing, this Clark Technic. It's called the BBD 320. It's a Bucket Brigade analog Bucket Brigade thing that gives you spatial, like a 3D thing. And it's like $150. And this thing is the most ridiculously cool piece of hardware that I've bought in a long time, because it just makes everything just three-dimensional in a way that I can't even explain. And it takes things out of the focus. So when things are like right in the middle, instead of just panning them, you can spread them out. And I've kind of a little bit of addicted to it now, especially on like keys or guitar. It just like opens this three-dimensional. When you put the headphones on, it's like, wow. But then you put it in mono, it sounds exactly the same. I don't get how it works, but it's a pretty cool piece of technology.
When you are producing, do you use headphones or do you use monitors?
I use monitors. I use headphones to find mistakes and to kind of listen for clicks and that kind of thing. And I always check in headphones, but I don't like producing in headphones. Yeah. I mean, I have done it, and some of my best tracks I've done in headphones. I think it's sort of a selfish thing. Like, I just like to listen to bass and I like a big sound, you know, maybe a little too much. But yeah, headphones are, I mean, if you don't have monitors, you can still make great music. In fact, it's probably in a lot of ways more detailed and better quality in some ways. But yeah, I like the boom.
When you're producing, do you work in quadrophonic or octaphonic sounds?
I've experimented with that. For a while I really wanted to do a 5.1 thing, but you know, I've realized more and more when it comes to things like quadrophonic, there's definitely an interesting effect that can happen, but you have to be sitting in the exact right spot. Or if you have a quadrophonic sound system, you have to sort of be dancing in the exact spot. Otherwise, you lose power. And to me, mono is power, and stereo is for telling a story, or quadrophonic is for telling a story. But you start to lose power with that. The power, and in fact, if I'm playing on a really crappy sound system, like on an art car at Birdie Man or something, and it's just like not cutting through, I put it in mono, because that maintains the power and actually boosts the perceived level of the sound in a way, because the stereo field is often, I think, overrated for what it can do on big sound systems that aren't ideal, especially rooms that aren't tuned properly. So when you get into like things like quadrophonic, you're actually getting more and more, you have to be more specific about how you design the room and where you stand. And so it becomes kind of a pain in the ass, basically. So I've kind of stopped pursuing it. And now who knows, you know, maybe in a couple years, there'll be some new pieces of technology that'll come out that'll make things like quadrophonic more accessible to the general consumer. But right now it's such a niche market that I haven't really gotten super into it.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great explanation and reasoning. And when you're talking about lose power, what came to my mind was the resonant or the destructive frequencies. Are there certain instruments that you typically put into mono and certain instruments that you leave in stereo? Or do you try and increase that oomph for all environments?
Well, it's as a general rule. I mean, it's kind of like bass and kick are almost always mono. As you move up the frequency spectrum, you can kind of stereoize things like bass. But I always put my kick in mono. I've never used a stereo kick before, I just don't see any reason why.
Yeah.
And then vocals, if any kind of lead vocal, I'll put in mono. Maybe the effects or some of the reverbs, or if there's backup vocals, those will be kind of spread around the stereo field. I would say that like my music is generally more kind of focused in the center. I know I actually find too much stereo play, like when you have something really far over here and it moves around, that can be kind of titillating and fun, but it can also be very distracting to have things be constantly moving around. Or like when you have like a tom that's like do-do-do-do-do-do-do, and it kind of moves through the stereo field, it feels very unnatural to me, because like when you're listening to a drummer, it's generally more kind of focused. So it's like I'm not inside the drum kit. So I try to be careful with how I use the stereo field. The way I like to use it generally is like to give a sense of openness, but then I always check it in mono to make sure that there's still the whole heart of the song is still working, because if it can't work in mono, then there's no point, because there's just gonna be so many times when the song is gonna be in mono, whether you like it or not. So I use it kind of sparingly, although like I said, I got this new Bucket Brigade thing, and now I'm kind of like, oh geez, now here I'm going stereo like all the way now. But
nice.
Yeah, it's always changing.
Yeah, well, it makes me think of like some of those old songs that like if you just had one earphone in, you're missing the vocals. The vocals are in the other ear and the guitar. And it's kind of strange going back to those old tracks, like wow, that was they went all out on the panning.
Yep.
Yeah. So and when you're checking those stereo sounds in mono, do you just put the master track in mono, or how do you check it?
I have the a Dangerous Music D box that has a mono button.
Oh, okay.
And you just click that, make sure everything's working. I have two different. I have like a stereo sub and a mono sub that I can reference to make sure things aren't phasing. Yeah, it's kind of a thing. I think I've gotten to the point now where like I don't really usually have phasing problems, but it happens. Every once in a while you'll check it in mono and be like, oh, okay, like that's getting totally eliminated or something's wrong. So it's important to always. I think like I use mono a lot of times to get the levels, like on the final mix, where I'll be like, I'll put it in mono and make sure like the hi-hat is balanced with the snare and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then go back into stereo and keep working.
Nice. Kind of being self-reflective here, looking back at your career, were there any points that were either perceived or maybe you perceived it as a failure? So like any huge or major failures that maybe it wasn't in your mind, but in the public's or your parents or something like that, but any failure that helped set you up for success later on?
I mean, I think that if you're trying to pursue music as take it very seriously, and especially as a career, it will humble you constantly. There are so many, I guess, I hate to call them failures now, because like you said, they all set you up for the next thing. And it's important to have these kind of failures where you bomb a show or even release a track that I'm not proud of. And the answer is absolutely yes. I've had some major failures. A lot of times it's technical, like a piece of gear will fail, or for instance, when I played at Red Rocks this last time, my vocal processor just started fritzing out on me right during my Red Rocks show, and it was just like my first time at Red Rocks, and I didn't even realize how bad it was until I went back and listened to the recording and could hear my voice really clearly, and I was like, oh my God. And so I ended up not being able to release my whole Red Rock set because there was like this kind of crackling happening on my voice the whole time. So I don't know if that's really a failure or a technological failure or what, but that kind of thing just happens, and you just kind of got to roll with it and try your best. I mean, one of the things that I learned in the early days of making music, when I was really into at that time, I was kind of into like kind of shamanism and stuff like that, and Carlos Castaneda And there was this thing called controlled folly, which is sort of a spiritual practice, but it works in music as well. So if you hit a wrong note, instead of going, oh fuck, I hit a wrong note, and like make a big weird face and kind of like have it ruin your night, you play the note again.
Yeah.
And do it this time more confidently, and then find a way out, you know? And
like
so by using that technique now, it's like any mistake you make, you embrace it and make it try and make it a part of what you're doing, instead of acknowledging it, especially to an audience. And you just got to roll through it, you know? But I mean, sometimes it's so bad that you have to stop. I mean, I've had to stop in the middle of a set and, you know, rewire something or whatever, you know. I think I've had to even cancel sets, you know, because of technical stuff, and that's just part of it. It happens.
Like in the event that you play a wrong note, or that Red Rock show that you're talking about, did you notice it, at least in the Red Rock show, did you notice it while you were performing?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
I did, but I didn't realize how bad it was until I was in the recording, but I did notice it.
Okay. And how do you...
Yeah, it sucked.
No kidding. How do you stay cool in a situation like that? Like, walk me through the mental game, recognizing, okay, this is a huge amphitheater, this is a beautiful venue, this is my night, and then you hear some crackling, and how do you stay on focus but still acknowledge what's the reality unfolding?
I think it's something that you learn through experience, you know, after kind of like a sense of letting go of those feelings. And like I said, it's like you have to just embrace those things and move forward. There's really nothing you can do that's going to help that's by dwelling on it. And so it's a little, I guess, a mental game that you have to learn to play with yourself to really just be okay with it, because it just happens. And when you're just getting started, if it's your first set you've ever played and something like that happens, you know, it's devastating and you might crumble, and that's totally understandable. But as time goes on, you realize that that's just part of being a musician. That's just part of being a performer. You know, things don't always work out perfectly, and sometimes things happen that are completely unexpected and can be just, you know, I mean, I'll tell you a crazy story about something that happened to me. Have you ever seen this? It's like this traditional thing where the guys like hang themselves off with hooks through their skin and their back.
Yeah.
It's like a Native American, I'm trying to remember the name of it.
Okay.
But so it's a thing where you put a hook through your skin, and if you do it enough times, you know, you become skilled at it. And I had this guy that did that all the time, and I was playing a New Year's show years ago, and he got up, pulled the hooks up, gushing blood everywhere. Just started some vein got popped, and I had this guy hanging behind me with just blood pouring out of him all over the stage, and the crowd is horrified. Like, what the fuck are you doing?
Did you even notice?
And then the guys that work at the venue like come out the mops, and they're like, we're not getting paid for this shit. And I was like, oh my god. And just like looking this scene of horror, you know, and I was just like, you know, you just gotta, it just shit happens.
Yeah. Did you notice it?
Learn
because he was behind you.
Yeah, he was behind me.
Did you notice it while you were playing?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Or
it was horrible.
Man, that's pretty gnarly. Yeah, I haven't heard of a story like that. That's a unique one.
Yeah.
What are some of the best investments that you've ever made? That could be monetary or time invested into something, learning a craft, learning something new. What do you see as, you know, some of the most valuable uses of your time or money?
I think that I've realized that like isolation is probably the best investment you can make for production. I mean, having a bedroom in your studio, a studio in your bedroom, and when you have like roommates and that kind of thing, kind of forces you into this weird kind of self-conscious bubble where you're not able to fully experiment. And especially if you like play any kind of instruments or you sing, because you always feel like someone's listening, and when there's someone like walking around like doing dishes and that kind of thing, and you're kind of like, you feel like a little mousy. And I think that the best thing I ever did was to really like separate my living life from my studio life, and to have sort of a clean break there to where I'm just completely free to do whatever the hell I want and make the weirdest sounds. And that's a pretty big investment to make. It can cost a lot, or it can be hard on your partner or whatever it is. But I think taking time to be on your own in a quiet environment where you can just fully let go is probably the number one thing that I need to be able to make quality music.
Yeah. What is some advice that you would give to a musician starting out today that approached you and said, hey, I want to make it in the music industry. They're a hardworking, smart, young musician. What would you tell them?
I think number one is to be patient, because it takes a long time, and until you put in like 10,000 hours, you're not going to feel like you're in control. You're going to be kind of feeling tugged along, I guess, by performing or producing. And that's a really awesome time to hone in on your craft. But just if you want it to be your career, you have to be really super patient to let things develop in your own skill sets. And I think the other thing is to be prolific, to learn the art of your craft, but then also learn the art of finishing and learn how to actually say things are done, and to keep making music, make and finish music. And once you make like 100 songs or something, then you'll get to the point where you'll start to feel comfortable that you can actually make what you want rather than sort of stumbling across things, I guess. So I think being prolific is probably the number one piece of advice that I would give.
How do you know a track is done?
There's a couple different things that happen. I mean, it's a tough one. You never really know for sure. I generally get very excited when I'm working on a new song, and I have this glow around it where everything's so kind of, I'm just like bobbing my head. I'm really feeling it. And when I get to the point where I'm actually feeling kind of like taxed by the song a little bit, where it sort of becomes like I can't hear it anymore, I'm just tired of working on it, then I think it's either A, it's done, or B, put it away and come back to it in a couple weeks or something. And then I think when it's done when, like, for me, a lot of times I'll know when it's done when I actually like put it on for some other people, and it feel like for some reason listening to it with other people often tells me if it's done or not. If there's some sort of moment where I feel like I can tell like the crowd kind of didn't quite come with me, or I'll play it for my friend and they'll kind of like lose interest or something. I'll be like, okay, there's something in that one spot that I could tell. Oh, it was something about reading the reaction of other people. I'm not making it necessarily for that reaction, but it does help you sort of see like how the song is working on a technical level. So, but yeah, when it's done, I don't know, but sometimes I think it's done and then I'll release it and I'll be like, oh man, that thing wasn't even close, or vice versa. I worked on it too much, or I don't know.
Yeah. It sounds like you would kind of experiment by playing it live and get that feedback before you publish it. Is that accurate?
Yeah. That's generally the case, yeah.
And so at least with friends, like if you don't have a crowd, like crowd's going to kind of tell you whether or not they mean to or not. But a friend, they don't really want to offend you. They don't want to tell you this that doesn't work. I mean, unless you got musician friends who are actually, very capable. How do you kind of judge reaction from, your partner or friends that you should be showing it maybe in your own home?
I mean, I think that actually I almost find that my musician friends are the ones that are the hardest ones to read, and they'll give me all kinds of, usually like my producer friends will be like, oh, I think that, at like 40 hertz, you're kind of like booming a little bit. And that's the kind of tips that I often get from my musician friends. But they're so usually wrapped up in their own musical projects that they're actually very difficult people to kind of give me a sense of whether something is done or not, because they're already so kind of in their own bubble with how they listen to music that quite often I get the best advice from people who aren't musicians, and they don't necessarily know the language around it, but they'll give me that kind of just their intuitive feeling on it, and they can't describe it. And I actually sometimes appreciate that advice more because it's really so much more pure. They're not overthinking it. You know, they don't know how to describe it. Like, I don't know, just something about that part. It was just a little weird or, you know.
So kind of going off of the advice that you would give, I'm hoping that this might be valuable to a musician, but what's the worst advice that you've ever been given? And you don't have to call anybody out.
Well, no, I know. I think that when you're getting started, I wouldn't necessarily call it advice, but there's a lot of people that are going to try and tell you that you're wasting your time and that you shouldn't, you need to get a job, you know, whether it's your parents or whatever. And they kind of get in the way of things. And so you got to take everything with a little bit of a grain of salt. And like, if you really truly are passionate about it and if you love your music, if you like to listen to your own music on your own time, like you like enjoy the music, then I think that you're going to be fine. You know, I think it's, if you're not sure if you like your music, then no one else is going to be sure if they like your music either, I guess. So, another big thing that I think is really important is not to get sucked up into being too competitive. And like when it comes to either like battle of the bands or talent shows and that kind of thing, I think that can be a real disheartening thing if you think you want to win something and you don't win. I mean, when I was in high school, we did a lot of battle of the bands, things like that. And like we were competing against like dancers and, you know, folk bands, and then we're playing heavy metal, and then we get third place and we'd be like, no, we should have won, you know. And it's like that kind of attitude of being competitive. I think it's really important not to be competitive. Even, you know, now in the scene, sometimes like you can kind of get the sense like, oh, I should be like a little higher on the lineup, or I call it font wars, when you're like,
font,
the size of the font. Yeah. Like, so-and-so's up the top and you're here, and then so-and-so's below you, and you feel like, no, I should be like, you know, here with a bigger font or whatever. And when I was like in my early 20s, I would get really butthurt. I'd be like, no, why am I here? Or that kind of thing. And it's just, after getting to know how the whole scene works and how all these guys that are throwing these events, they don't know, they're trying their best. And, you know, it can, getting your ego out of it, right? You know, focus on the craft. Don't worry about all the noise. And just do what you can, because sometimes the best music is very niche, and it's not the kind of thing that everyone's going to love. It's like you have a refined audience, and what's more important is to have an audience that really likes your music than to have a huge audience of people that are just kind of into your music, and it's just like it's there, right?
Yeah.
So I think, focusing on like your sound and really honing in on your craft and your audience and getting those people to experience the best that you can offer them, rather than trying to make everybody happy, you know. So,
well, it's interesting that you brought up that competition thing, because I was thinking about that before we jumped on this interview, and it was just kind of a natural thing that popped up into my head. And it just sounds like, when I'm listening to your music, it sounds like you're not competing. You're not trying to be a better X than that other person. You're trying to create something genuine, and it just feels heartfelt. It doesn't feel like you're trying to one up, you know, make the drop heavier than the other artist, you know, whatever it is.
It didn't always used to be like that, you know. For me, I did want to do that thing. I wanted to one up. I wanted to make breaks. I wanted to like do things that were like, like that. Like I was like, I wanted to be accepted in someone else's scene, right? And then once I made that transition and like, no, I want to do the best that I can for my sound, rather than that, you know. And I think that's a big step to make, I think, as a producer.
And was there like a turning point or an inflection point that helped you realize that, or a mental breakthrough that kind of led you down that path?
Yeah, I mean, there were several, but, you know, when I was first coming up in the scene, you know, I was playing with artists that are now very, like, I was, you know, like Bass Nectar or whatever would like open for me, or, you know, play shows with like Tipper and, these guys, and I watched all of them sort of blow up on this level. And I, to be completely honest, at the time, I kind of felt like envious, right? I felt a little bit sort of, and I'm like, I need to make like dirtier beats. I need to like somehow, because that was the scene I was in, all my, that little bubble that I was in, that's what everybody wanted. And I thought, oh, well, I have to make something for that bubble. And then, but secretly I was making this music on the side that was a little bit more kind of gentle and melodic. And one year at Burning Man, I just got on the sound system at sunrise, turned on the sound system and played all this music for about 10 people. And I had like one friend in particular was just like dancing in front. He's like, dude, this is it. And I remember just being like, oh my God, like what am I doing? Trying to like, I should, instead of trying to like fit into someone else's niche, I need to create my own. I need to like just be okay. Like, this is what I do. This is who I am as a person, and accept it and see what happens.
I can just imagine it. And it's interesting that the big breakthroughs come at kind of such a small or a delicate moment and a small window of time. Kind of makes me think of a book that I was forced to read in college called Blue Ocean Strategy. And they talk about sharks, and, you know, in the red ocean, there's all these sharks competing for the food. But if you just swim to the blue ocean, odds are there's going to be food. If you're a shark.
Oh.
Anyways.
Yeah.
Anyways, it just popped in my head. What have you become better at saying no to over the years?
I've definitely become better at saying no to shows for a while. I think it's important when you're getting started to say yes to almost everything you can. And it kind of gets back to that kind of like that feeling of like desperation in a way, where I was kind of saying yes to every opportunity that came along because I just wanted to get it out there. And as time goes on, I've gotten more and more comfortable saying no. And there's a lot of power in that for yourself to really know what's going to be healthy for you and what's going to be, basically taking care. You need to take care of yourself in order to be a good performer and to be able to present your art in its most powerful capacity. So things like, you know, like if I like playing a gig in New York and then like, okay, there's an opportunity to play the next night in Philly, but you got to like wake up at 5 a.m. and drive 8 hours and yada, yada, yada. And there was a time where I'd be like, yes, we just got to do it no matter what. If we can physically do it, we do it. And now I've realized, no, that's actually not a very good idea, because I'm going to be so burnt out by the end of doing stuff like that, that it's not really worth it for the audience to see me in that state. So, I've gotten a lot better at saying no to things I don't want to do. Right. So I think that's where I'm coming from now.
And then going back, circling back on that self-care theme that you were just talking about, is there anything important for you? Like, do you take a season off? Do you never do gigs at this particular time of year? How do you take care of yourself and still create? You know,
it's like mind, body, spirit, and you have to take care of all those things in order to be a successful person. And if you start to let one of those things fall away, that's when the burnout happens. I think that the biggest thing that I did that enabled me to be able to continue to live this lifestyle was I bought a Sprinter van and converted it into a little home. And I've been touring with my now fiance, Michelle, and helps me set up my lights. And so we go on the road together, as opposed to being on a tour bus with a bunch of bearded men, not sleeping, not eating out every night, not, just partying and like going down. Now when I tour, I try to make it like life, right? So it's like go camping, do yoga, make our own food, try and make sure that I always like to sit around the fire, find a way to go camping and get a fire going and have that be the reset between as many shows as possible, stuff like that, hiking. So instead of treating the road as this endless party and a grind, to treat it as life. Like, how do I make my tours sustainable? How do I, make the road sustainable. And that has helped me immensely, because now when I get home from tour, I feel good. Where it used to be that I'd get home from tour and feel like crap for like a month, right? Of course, with all this COVID thing, it's been a kind of an exception. There hasn't been a lot of shows, but I've really been enjoying the downtime. So I think, yeah, it's important to schedule in life.
You mentioned setting up lights. I just kind of wonder, because as you tour, all these different venues have different setups, different sound systems, engineers, lighting, rigs. So how do you kind of adapt to these different areas? Do you try and take as much as you can with you, so that way you've got what you need, or do you try and embrace the house system?
It depends on the venue, but yeah, I built my own light rig because I'm not at the level of my career where I can walk into a venue and tell them I want all these lasers and all this, at every single show, and have the best of the best. I don't often get that opportunity. Maybe I'm playing a small club in Indianapolis or something, and they have like, a couple Lecos and a disco ball. So I built my own light rig with Edison bulbs, and I also do some projection work. And I think it's really important for what I do, because it helps me create a vibe everywhere I go. And so I'm all in on that. I'm actually building a new light rig right now for the upcoming year for that reason. So it's a little bit of it's a lot to wrap your head around to try and manage controlling lighting and sound, but I've tried to simplify everything. It all operates inside of Ableton to make it sort of seamless and stress-free. So it's just kind of finding the balance there of like how much I can take on mentally, and how much also like how can I set it up during sound check, I mean, yeah, I have big dreams for things I'd love to do, but a lot of times it takes like 3 days to build, so that's not really realistic. So if I can set it up in an hour and a half and get dinner and play the show, then I'm gonna do it.
Talk to me about like some of that lighting aspect, because is it triggered by the audio in Ableton? The projection? And
so yeah, there's two different things. The projection is, yes, everything's triggered inside of Ableton. For video, there's a lot of different things now that are happening, but I typically use like Archaos, which is you set up like a separate MIDI channel that triggers clips, and that can run behind Ableton on the same computer or maybe a separate computer. That's a little bit more technical, and I have found it to be somewhat distracting and more challenging than the lighting. And the lighting, I use, it's called DMXs, and it's like this little blue box that converts USB into DMX, and it runs as a VST plugin inside of Ableton, and you control it the same way you would control any kind of synth or whatever. So I have dedicated controller for it, and it's all synced to MIDI clips to the music, and it's really free, and I can just I have a little box that I can just reach over and start messing with the lights and have it go automated, or it's very simple and totally badass. It's just like really cool, because it's like I don't need a lighting person, and everything's in sync, and I can actually like make the lights go with the music however I want. And a lot of times if I'm in like, we're driving on a long drive, I'll just pull out my laptop and I'll make a new lighting program, just like that. And so it's a very powerful tool.
That's awesome. When you're on stage performing musically, so we'll kind of leave the lighting aside now. When you're performing, what do you bring on stage, and how much of it is, the track, and how much of it is freeform or kind of creativity in the moment?
It's a little bit of everything. It kind of depends on what I've gotten into breaking my songs into stems. But it's sort of I did one tour where I broke everything out, and I had all my synths and all my hardware, and I was trying to like kind of recreate everything in that way to create more of a somewhat more improvised experience where I had total control. And in some ways that was awesome, but it also, a lot of times it was at the compromise of the overall sound, because I was too preoccupied with the technology to the point of not being able to focus on the music, I guess. And there's so many points of failure that if something were to go wrong, I'd find myself very distracted by trying to fix it. And with just being one person, when all you have to kind of hold it down the entire time. If I was in a band and I was like an element of a larger, or if I have tour with other musicians, for instance, then I feel a lot more freedom to do more, I guess. But being a solo performer, it's very important that I keep the vibe going the whole time. And I have to be very careful about what I add because it can be just too distracting. So where I've gotten to now is really focusing on using my guitar and my voice in creative ways to kind of layer over things. I have this thing that I call the cube that I'm going to be bringing out, it's basically an equalizer, a bunch of effects, and then I can send anything out of my laptop into this thing and just completely destroy it, bring it back to life. But then if I want to, I can just immediately go back to the track, right? So it kind of gives me this freedom of like doing both, I guess, instead of depending on my synth to always be the bass. I have things that I can just take things out and tweak them and bring them back in. And it's a work in progress that I've been trying to do. I haven't had as much time in the past to develop my live show, but with COVID, I've been able to sort of experiment now with different ways of doing it. So I am hoping that as these next few shows come out, that I'll be able to have a hybrid of being able to have total creative control, but also be able to depend on the music to always be there if I need it.
Looking at your background is pretty mesmerizing. You got that beautiful fractal pattern. Are you creating those visual aspects, or are you kind of pulling them in?
I made this. Yeah, this is an aquarium that I took ink and just dropped it into the aquarium.
So that's an actual photograph that you've mirrored.
That's a photo.
Wow. So you put red, or whatever, blue, all those.
Yeah. Dropped it, little drops of ink into an aquarium, and then took a picture of it.
That's great.
Yeah, and then I do make videos for my live shows. I'm not video is a whole freaking world in itself that like I have to kind of limit my time with it because I get sucked in and it's just so it's time consuming. I love it, but it's like, compared to making music, it's slow, right? And it just like 10 hours will go by. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm still working on this 2-minute clip. So it's, but I have friends that give me content as well. Like Andrew Jones has given me a lot of content. Scott Hedstrom, a couple other, Boris Johnson, a couple of friends of mine have given me content over the years that I can kind of feed into it.
You've talked about it a little bit, but I kind of want to dive a little bit more. So I want to ask, what role do psychedelics play in creating your music?
They play an important role in that they help you point out. They give you it's a way to see music in a more three-dimensional way, a more pure way, and it's the kind of thing that, for me anyway, psychedelics have played a critical role in understanding my music. Do I use them all the time? No. Do I need them all the time? Not really. But it's the kind of thing. It's like there's this old saying, once the finger is to point out the moon, but once the moon is seen, the finger is no longer needed, right? It's like once you see music in a psychedelic space, then, or and maybe some people it's meditation, or some people it's like athletics or whatever it is that gets you in that place where you can fully see it. Then once it's there, then you kind of don't need it to kind of always be there as a part of it. But I don't think that I would even be making music now if I would have never tried psychedelics, because I think it really gave me insight into how important music is to my emotional state and how powerful it can be. So yeah, psychedelics for me have been critical. I hate saying that anyone should do them, but I think for me it's been very important.
Yeah. When did you first start using or try psychedelics? Was it before the metal band? Was it after that? It
was after that, when I first came to Oregon, like 97, 98, when I tried for the first time. And I was just talking about this yesterday with someone, but I have like this box, all those 4-track tapes, and I went and listened to them at one point, and there's the moment when I took mushrooms was like this line in the sand where everything before that was like cheesy folk songs and stuff. And after that was like these 9-minute ambient compositions of like howling in the closet. You know, it just opened my eyes, my ears. And then, you know, and of course, experimenting with the different types of psychedelics and how they give you different insights, you know, whether LSD or ayahuasca, which is probably the most powerful. Each thing gives you a different perspective on what music is and how to perceive the, you know, really the detail of like how important detail is, and kind of the transcendent quality of what is possible with music.
So I want to dive into a few of your songs and kind of talk about some of the layering and the sound choices. I want to specifically zone in on some of your more recent tracks, Cloud-Based, Lifeform, and Earth and Sun in particular. So we'll go Earth and Sun for right now. What kind of hand drum is that?
It's a hand pan. My friend let me borrow it. I think it's Arcana is the brand. So yeah, my friend let me borrow that for a while and then wrote that song with that one.
So you were playing it?
Yeah.
That's great. And have you been playing it for a long time? Like, is this something that you just got in your back pocket, or your friend just gave it to you and day one you just figured out this melody?
Well, I think it's like I'm not. So I have lots of instruments, and I love collecting weird instruments and playing different instruments. Although I'm not really good at anything, you know, I'm just kind of like okay at things. But when I get my hands on a new instrument, I generally try to find something that brings out the sound of that instrument in its most pure form. And as like I was saying before, my instrument isn't necessarily the instrument I'm working on, it's the production. So I just played that thing probably, you know, I played it for like 10 minutes, went through, found like the best chunks of it, layered things, moved things around until I came up with this sort of kind of the way it sounds in the track. And that's the way I do like almost all of my recordings now. It's like very... If you were to listen to the original, you'd be surprised about how horrible it was because I'm picking through of trying to find little pieces and elements of things that a lot of it has to do with happy accidents, right? It's just like, you know, I'm playing it like, oh, that was a weird mistake. And then I'll listen to it later. I'm like, actually I couldn't have tried to do that. It had to be a mistake. So there is an advantage to not knowing how to play things because if you're a producer, you can those are those little unexpected little things that end up sounding great in the end.
Yeah. Well, those imperfections kind of make it, in a way, off the grid or off the note path, or, you know, if you hit that wrong note, as you said, play it again and play it harder. That's cool. So that track, at least for me, is very like light and ethereal and like uplifting. So I wonder, in your mind, what was the inspiration behind, you know, the day that you went into the studio and started recording that?
That was, so both those songs, Cloud-Based, Lifeform, and Earth and Sun, I had this opportunity a friend of mine owns this piece of property up near, in between Lyons and Estes, up here in the mountains of Colorado. And it's on like 40 acres adjacent to the Rocky Mountain National Park and this beautiful home that he built. So we worked some stuff out where I ended up being able to use that house to go up there for like these month-long recording sabbaticals. So it's just got such a vibe, right? To be completely by yourself up in the snowy, kind of like the mountains, the picture behind you, it kind of looks like that. And so the cloud-based life form was the first song I wrote up there, and it's really just kind of taking in the vibe of this beautiful room and the fire. And I mean, that whole album has, I can hear it, a little crackling of the fire, because every time I turned on the mic, the fire was going. So I had to use a couple tools to get rid of that sound occasionally, but that there's a certain, it's just about a vibe, right? And so that was the vibe up there. It was just incredible.
And were you up there solo for those months?
I was up there solo, but we did a couple times where I had friends come up, and then ended up recording my friends up there that, and in fact, in that song, I have a couple friends on it. My fiance, Michelle, is actually doing the vocals, and she's not really even a singer, but she was reading some, I asked her to grab a book of poetry and then read the poems backwards from the last words to the beginning, and just started recording her, and then just seeing what kind of things came out of it. And then when she did that, and then took that, ran it through Melodyne, turned her into an angel. So
she already was, though, right?
Yeah, of course.
Well, that's interesting. So she wasn't even trying to sing the poetry backwards. She was just speaking.
Yeah, I think I got her to sing.
Okay.
A little bit, kind of very basic stuff, and then went through and layered and tweaked. Yeah, from there.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I love Melodyne. I use it all the time for all different kinds of things. It's a very powerful tool that a lot of times people think of it as a pitch correction tool, but it's highly experimental. You can just do so much with it. So I use it all the time to kind of take things that aren't supposed to be necessarily musical and turn them into like very musical things.
Given the fact that you've created so many tracks, I wonder, do you have any favorites in your mind, or are they, like children and the typical parent says, oh, I love them all equally, what are some of your standout tracks in your mind, or proudest moments?
I mean, yeah, kind of goes back to the whole thing of, like, for me, music is a tool to stimulate an emotion, and every track has a different kind of emotion that it creates. And sometimes they're very specific, and I don't necessarily need to feel that emotion, but when I do, I'm so glad it's there. A lot of times for me, it's like if I'll find myself I go to certain songs more, I guess, but does that mean they're my favorite? Not necessarily, because sometimes there's that one track that I need it for that one particular moment. But then I also have like my, I don't know. They're kind of, there's definitely songs that I've made that I don't like and I don't listen to at all. But I guess I have a few, like For My Corpse is probably one of my personal favorites that I end up kind of like needing that one a lot. Give Me That Hope kind of is another one that a good tool for me to go into. Give me that hope. So it just kind of depends on what I need in that moment, I guess. So I guess that's a pretty ambiguous answer.
No, it's great. It's great. So, yeah. Is it accurate to say that you use your music as like a tool or medicine for a particular day or particular emotion?
Yeah, I do. And I like to think of them as sort of tools, as a way to create an emotional space. And a lot of times during a set, for instance, let's say I'm playing at a festival, the guy before me or girl before me is playing like a really heavy, super intense set, right? I have certain songs that I know are good transitional. They're kind of have a heaviness to them, but then allow me to kind of slowly move into more of my sound. So I'll be able to place that song at that certain moment and use it as a way to kind of vibe into a different space. Or let's say I'm playing a sunrise set, but I start at 4 a.m. when it's still dark out. Well, I know that there's going to be certain songs that are going to be more appropriate for the dark. And then there's other songs that work as a way to kind of move out of that energy and change into a different vibe. So I try and think of these songs as sort of like kind of, they have their place in their time, and they're effective in certain ways to move energy into different directions.
And so when you're at a festival or something, you can't really control who's before you or what the last song that they're going to leave you on. So how last minute are you rearranging what order of tracks you're going to put?
I never planned my sets.
Really?
So yeah. So the only time I would plan my set is if I'm playing with like a band, and we need to kind of be on point with that. Other than that, it's always a free for all for me. I never really even think about it. So sometimes I'll think about like what I want to start with, or I'll have an idea like, at the very end, I know I want to play like a couple songs at the end that kind of wrap up the night, that kind of thing. But beyond that, it's usually just completely freeform.
There's some amateur sets out there that people will, launch a new Ableton project in between songs, and there's downtime. So how do you keep it so free flowing and yet give yourself the flexibility and minimal, loading the project time where there's silence?
Yeah. So the way I've done it is I break whether it's stems or tracks or whatever, you have your clip view, and I'll arrange all my stems and then I'll pull it into a pack, on the left hand column, there's I have a folder of just packs, and the packs are really powerful because you can either just grab the song and pull it right into your clip as is, like right into the clips, or you can drag it all the way to the right where they have that kind of clip launch thing, and then you can have everything all laid out exactly how you want it, with like being able to trigger each clip off the I can't remember the name of that thing on the right there, but so I use the packs as a way so when I open up my set to play a live set, there's nothing there. It's totally empty. And I just drag things in as I want them, and then I'll delete them when I'm done using them, and just slowly arrange, and sometimes I'll jump ahead. If in the middle of a set, I'll be like, okay, I know I want to play these next 3 songs, and I'll drag in these packs. But being able to do the pack thing is sort of like a good way to keep it from ever having any kind of downtime or having to reload your session.
And how do you manage any general tips out there for how do you manage those transitions, fading in one, fading out the other, and aligning the tempos, or thinking about the flow of the set?
I would say that's probably, of all the things that I do, I'm least proficient at that because I know that it's like if you're a DJ and you can do things like key mixing, and where you can blend in songs of the same key or similar keys to kind of and really morph things together in a way that is completely seamless. I'm somewhat limited because I can only work off the songs that I've written. So a lot of times I don't have key mixing is harder for me. So what I generally do is I have these ambiances, I have beats, I have a whole selection of transitional tools that I use that I can sort of bring in a beat, fade into that beat, bring in a different kind of ambient textural thing, and then slowly morph in the next track with that. So I have a little tool set of transitional things that I use to kind of get in between songs. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And mostly, like I said, with the key mixing thing, that's where the biggest conflicts happen, where I'm trying to change, something that's like maybe one semitone apart from the next track, and how do I seamlessly do it? And it can be tricky, you have to just find a way to do it, I guess.
Yeah.
It's always a crapshoot.
I wanted to talk about a set that I saw of yours. Let's see, I don't know exactly the date, but The Dark Side of Random Rab. So I want to talk about that. So first of all, for those listening who don't know the dark side of Random Rab, do you want to kind of introduce that project?
More is that?
Yep.
Yeah. MOUR is a side project that that I have. Yeah, I guess it's sort of my little bastard twin brother. And yeah, so I it's sort of like songs that have been rejected from the Random Rab repertoire that have found their way into a side project that and yeah, so when I perform as more, I kind of like to think of it as becoming a different person. It kind of harkens back to my more kind of heavy metal, Nine Inch Nails kind of 5 days, more disjointed, experimental in a different way. And I wear a mask. Of course, that's not as cool anymore now that everybody's wearing masks. But yeah, so that's a kind of thing that I don't really do that often. But when I have a more set coming up at like a little private event, and it's always really fun to do it because it's just kind of like it feels different. I feel like a different person and it's a different energy.
Like, what is it that was kind of deep down that you knew that you needed to launch this under a separate name, under a separate project?
I think because it's interesting because it's sort of a catch-22. Like I'm not. At the time, I was kind of debating that. I was like, well, do I release this stuff under Random Rab and just see what happens? Or, people sort of, now if someone's like looking for me on Spotify and they were to stumble upon a more album that was written as Random Rab, they might be completely thrown off about what I was trying to deliver. And it could be kind of confusing for people, and they would have to really explore my whole repertoire to understand like what's going on there. So I found it really easier just to kind of at first it was just kind of a way to release this music without kind of disrupting my flow of albums that a certain sound that I was working on. But in time I've come to value it as a way to sort of break out of myself. It's just really fun. It's fun to do something and have a different name, to have a different vibe, and to actually feel like a different person. It kind of brings something out in me that I actually really enjoy. It's more testosterone, edgy, like more, it kind of brings a part of me that like, so whenever I play a more set, I feel all amped up. Like I feel like I'm like, kind of feeling. And I've really started to enjoy it more and more. And I have another side project that I, don't really want to share the name of because it's like a secret side project that I just released on SoundCloud. So
start digging on SoundCloud.
What's that?
I was just saying, people got to dig on SoundCloud for it. But.
Yeah, I mean, it's just and the only people that have really discovered it completely found it organically. And I have, I'll get like just a few plays here and there, maybe 100 plays or something. And that also feels really good because it's kind of like, it's more pure. It's more, I can just throw a mix up there that has I'm not dependent on the feedback or anything, and everything's totally organic. And that's fun too, to kind of just have these like different ways you can kind of put things out there.
I feel like that takes a big dose of being humble to kind of start fresh and to open up a SoundCloud account, have 0 followers. And start releasing music and probably hear crickets, at first for a long time. So that's interesting.
It's kind of liberating too, though,
Oh yeah.
Because if I were to release a song and if crickets were to happen and it was a Random Rab track, maybe I would actually be kind of bummed, right? But because there's no expectation, if I get 7 plays, I'm like, wow, that's great. I got 7 plays.
7 people liked it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. So you've got 3 projects, one that's unknown. Is there any others out there?
I've had a couple that have been extinguished. So right now, that's all that's going now. Oh, I do. I forgot to mention. Yes, I do have one other project. It's called Dose, D.O.S. There's the violin player and producer Ilya Goldberg, who goes by Lapa. He plays with Emancipator. He's one of my best friends. We've co-written about 20 songs together, and we have a side project that we've been working on for the last couple of years called Dose, and we're going to be releasing either an EP or an album sometime in the next year. So I'm really excited about that. It sounds awesome.
Nice. And for everybody listening, where should they, put their antennae up and find that? Where Do you guys have a website? What's the best place to find that? Or
We
just
don't have
SoundCloud?
anything yet. So there's nothing to find
Nothing yet.
but it will be coming soon, and we'll let you know.
All right, all right. What's the best place that people can stay up to date with your music, any new projects, new albums? What's your...
Probably my Instagram at Random Rab, or my website, randomrab.com, or just, those are my kind of two basics, yeah.
When are you most productive? Do you work through the night? Do you get up early and work? What's your schedule like on the creating side of things?
I find that I am most creative at night, for sure. Between the hours of like 10 and 4 a.m. is kind of my sweet spot. However, I've been working more and more trying to change that. And so I have been trying to work on doing more daytime stuff. So if I get started early in the morning, I'm usually pretty good. I would say that's my worst time it's like, I guess like right now would be like the time where I just feel the least creative. But I try to use those moments like in the afternoon as a way to kind of like, I don't know, build like a sample library, or, set up some VSTs, that kind of more technical stuff, rewire my studio. There's always things to do, right? That aren't necessarily about creating music. It's about just getting ready to. And I think that that's really important to set time aside for that kind of stuff. Maybe to like watch some tutorials, learn how to use things better, that kind of thing.
What are some of the productivity hacks that you've kind of gathered over the years that have really amplified your ability to create efficiently?
I think that feeling well rested and feeling, having eaten well, getting some exercise. Like the perfect day for me is to like, maybe do some yoga, go on a hike or a bike ride or something, and then eat well, don't drink any alcohol, just feel good in my body, and then show up ready to go. And that's when I'm like, hell yeah. But when I'm sort of like, if I'm taxing myself, maybe I'm tired, or I spent all night blasting my ears out the night before, that kind of thing, and I'll just force myself. A lot of times I'll be really sluggish and not very creative. So I think it's important to really feel good, and have a good day. Like maybe like call my parents, talk to people, talk to a friend, like kind of just go into it feeling good, right? And then that's when the magic happens.
When you're feeling like overwhelmed or unproductive and you're trying to make music, what do you do?
Bang my head on the desk. It's I don't know. It can be, sometimes you just got to call it. Sometimes you just got to be like, look, it's not happening, and I've scheduled like a huge session for myself, and I'll come in and I'll just be like, nothing's happening. I'm not feeling it. And I think it's better just to, like I said, go get rested, go feel good, instead of just really forcing it, because that's kind of anti-productive to sort of just push and push and push and try when nothing's really working.
Because you've played so many places, I've seen pictures of you by the pyramids and various other places, countless to me. What are some of the most inspiring or profound or heart places that were kind of important to you that you've performed?
I mean, of course, like there's like the kind of like exciting, interesting, like the pyramids of Giza. That was like, whoa, what a mind-blowing experience to play there, right? I would say, there's always I've done 21 Burning Mans and played Sunrise every year. That's always really phenomenal to play Sunday morning Sunrise. But I would say that playing for, I've had the honor of performing for 3 eclipses. So I did the eclipse in Nevada, the eclipse in 2012 in Australia, and also the one at Oregon eclipse, where actually my set was in the beginning of the eclipse right before the totality. And nothing really can compare to that. It's just like completely, because you're basically you're the opener for like the Eye of God, right? So there's nothing that you can do that can possibly compete with who's the main act, right?
Yeah.
So you just got to like try to like your best to really bring something powerful. And those have been probably the most powerful, like kind of experiences of performing that I've ever had.
Well, for people who want to follow you, want to learn more about your music, you're on Spotify, Apple Music. You got your website. You mentioned Instagram. Is there any other places that people should know about?
Yeah, I think or my Bandcamp is a good place. That's where I post a lot of my music. It's very accessible there. But yeah, wherever you find it, it's the good place to go.
Nice.
Yeah.
And then, is there anything else that you want to share? Parting words, thoughts for the listeners?
Well, thanks for listening, everybody, and thanks for having me on your awesome show. And I just look forward to seeing everybody on the road again whenever that happens.
Yeah, great. Well, Rab, thank you so much for your time. You're being an open book and sharing your wisdom and knowledge and music with the world and the community. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your good questions, and thanks for having me on.
Listening to the Freio Music Podcast with Michael Morahan. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single episode. And don't forget to share this podcast everywhere. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay tuned.
Freio Music, Freio Music, Freio Music, Freio Music. You are listening to Freio Music.